the recorder again, so we're moving on. So this is a class diagram. You can see that UML shows you the class diagram. Again, what it can show you is the structure. We can say that our application is relying on the definition of a house and a person. And there are things that you can do with the person and with the house. And you can essentially explain to someone that those are the building blocks of our software. However, this diagram cannot display any runtime related information, like what happens at the beginning of the application, how soon these objects are created, and in what order, and then how exactly those methods are used. What is the so-called protocol of their use? So I brought you some examples of diagrams which actually are the diagrams of what happens when you log in into quiz application and upload application. For example, what happens at login time? No, just click the, hopefully it's not going to take too much time. I am amazed how much space is taken by, showing all of those things. Let me just make sure I hide all of this beautiful stuff. Okay, whatever. So at least I have a little bit more space. So what happens here? This is a working diagram. So it's not pretty. It's not intended, intended to be shown, in front of important audiences. But and I will not go into any details about what this might, really mean. But what happens is that we come in on in a main method. I will call this a method, although this is a function because this is written in C++. And then essentially it receives you trying to log in into application, your HTML request. So first, this request needs to be mapped to the fields involved. And then I can tell myself I need to find out what my persistent directory is, where my database resides. Then I say, okay, I have to deal with some encryption there because everything on the server side is encrypted. Then I have to, it's using some encryption, functions. Then I need to actually convert text to a internal map structure. Then I have to do some extra steps with that. Then I have to parse your input and my own hidden, or otherwise encrypted information. Then I need to go to do more encryption and more encryption. So this is what it really looks like when you're trying to log in. If I move on to a different diagram, which perhaps is something like start practice, right? So if I go to here, where is this? Okay, if I move on to start a practice, practicing the quiz, so what's happening is that, again, my screen is kind of small, so I'm going to try to do best here to just keep everything is in this shape. So first of all, when you start your practicing your quiz, for example, first I can tell from the sequence diagram that the constructor of this object is used, and this is because we're using the post method on our HTML request when the form is submitted by you to start the quiz. I'm constructing this post query object. Then I am also instantly construct HTML response object, which will be populated at some point. Then I'm also going to show you some submenu, whatever that is, and I'm constructing that object. So by looking at the name of the class here and the name of the method that is being called, and this is all the timeline of what's happening. So this happens first, this happens next, it happens next, moving on, and we can scroll it down. So this is there's a whole bunch more things happening, right? So then what happens is that I am going to say validate content length. So I'm trying to see if anyone is trying to abuse this application and submitting some junk, information there. So I need to do some basic checks. Then there's a load post content. Then there's decrypt hash. There is load system configuration. Validate some hash values. Then start the session. Create this object, CGI session. Right? So then I load user profile, then I load user session, because you already have a session, because you're already logged in and starting trying to practice for the quiz. And I say, is session has expired? So I validate that. Now, by the way, somewhere at the top, again, this browser is kind of limiting me, but I can scroll this here so that I can, I guess, make it easier. Let me, okay, mouse wheel works pretty well. So anyway, so we're moving on. These user permissions are checked, and see how you can sense what object is responsible for what action. For example, it's the CGI session object that can be used to get user permissions, what you're permitted to do. Maybe you're not permitted to run a quiz, right? Maybe your account was somehow disabled or suspended, or whatever is your situation, right? So then I deal with some menu and response submenu. Then I do some updates on the session more. Then I create a quiz object. So there's a quiz object that it gets created at this time, right? Then we say quiz ID. I don't know what that is. It's just like quiz internal identifiers configured. Then I load index. Then I generate question list. Then I say load session HTML, which means that now I am trying to convert this question list into something that can be used by you, because your browser is waiting for that HTML to be sent back to it, right? Then I say, create question interface, whatever that is. Apparently there's a static method that does that, right? Then I say parse question, essentially interpret it. Then I say save HTML, and here save HTML, for example, goes to question interface class, and it's capable of doing that. And it all shows you all the timeline, like what everything, as everything is happening. I can click on this, and hopefully if it opens in a separate box, you can see this is like something that I could print now. Like this is a graphical display of the entire graphic, and so it becomes printable. So anyway, now listen, you hear me saying all this, and like towards the end of it, see how HTML respond, okay to write content type and all that. So response is handled in the end. Now you get an idea what's involved. You get the scope, right? You can kind of get a sense. Okay, so that's what's happening when I click that button. That's what's happening on the server side. Now, do you think I would be able to do this by looking at the source code? No. First of all, I probably don't remember it that well. But if I look at this sequence diagram in this case, and all these parts are aligned in a real timeline, it's like what is really happening, that's a great thing. Now I can talk. Imagine if this was some other application I was trying to sell, and I brought in some prospective buyers or investors and something like that. If I brought this in to say, okay, that's the plan, that's what we're gonna do, that's what we're doing, or whatever, this really begins to tell the story, and everybody starts to begins to sense maybe the quality of this design, what's involved, how complex it is, and so forth and so forth. So this is a UML diagram. So in the UML sequence diagram, what you get is basically you get your objects across the top, and the timeline and annotation of methods that are taking place, and each method goes to its respectable object. And the object basically says, okay, I'm done, and you do the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and you got this, maze of calls, right, which really happen, and eventually it all ends, and then you're done, right? So this is an example of a sequence diagram. So hopefully, I mean, again, you realize that this can be very useful. So as, of course, our other type of diagram. So you can see where's the class diagram gives you a view of structure. I'm trying to find my Explorer window here. The sequence diagram gives you really the runtime information. This is what's happening in runtime. And see, I could still have a person class and a house class in this application, but they're not being used. They're not part of this, particular, practice start. By the way, this diagram was never created by a human. It's generated by a tool. Which does exactly what I told you. It looks at the source code, and in this case, it actually instruments the source code with some trace of runtime performance. Then I run practice, hit that button once, and it saves the information, and it results in creation of this diagram.